So we're going to go straight into the next panel. Now, the next panel, you need to come up to the same start point as the rest of us. So I'm actually going to give a quick run through of how we perceive the situation. And then I have 4 panelists who are going to explain a lot more. Usual starting slide. You know who I am by now. You don't need to pay attention to me. We still have this massive miscomprehension problem. We know that we get a lot of bad vibe associated with the textile industry. We know that we're not the second most polluting, but we're number 4 or 5. But that's arguing minor stuff. What we need to do is bear everything in mind. And right now, when we're looking at areas, we're only really looking at carbon. There are lots of elements, there are 13 that we've got to bear in mind, but carbon is where people are focusing. And performance days, we're now on the second show of the journey to carbon neutrality. But we've got to balance it with everything else. Hopefully, next show, which will be in March, all the fabrics that you see in the fabric forum will actually have a carbon footprint on. Right now, there are some fabrics with carbon footprints, but not every one. This slideshow, by the way, is going to be uploaded to the website in about 10 days' time, so you're going to be able to hear from us. We also have influences like this. Right now, we have a very informed consumer, and we haven't really taken that on board. The consumer is reading a lot more, they're finding out a lot more than we give them credit. They're also vastly more skeptical. They are spotting greenwashing way earlier than we're spotting greenwashing. And there are brands who are making too big a claim, and they are destroying their own reputation by being stupid, in my opinion. But we've also had a dumbing down within the industry. I talked about this last night. We're trying to get simple solutions and material fabric choices, or looking at the whole system of environmental and material impact assessments, we're trying to make simple. It's very, very complicated. And Blue Sign first shook the boat about 20 years ago, and it's chemical management. That's taken off very well. We have over 1,000 different standards in use in Europe currently. Speaking to the North Face, they monitor 132 different standards, and that's a massive problem. They want to simplify it down to what can be trusted. Fair Wear have done the most amazing thing about reminding us how the social side of the industry is just as important as the environmental impact. But about a decade ago, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition was formed, and we have gone forward from that. There is the Sustainable Apparel Coalition that uses the Higg Index. Essentially, the core measurements are in carbon, water, and waste. Now, if I was to ask the audience, when we were here in this building this June for Outdoor by ISPO, everyone was asking me, Charles, what is this thing about the Higg Index? What's the problem? No one would talk publicly. If I ask the audience now, have people heard of the controversy associated to the Higg Index? Is this something that I'm getting nodding heads. Would anyone like to try and explain it to me? I'm getting shaking heads. So what I'm going to try and do now is give you a brief history so that you can see what the debating point has been. Essentially, when Chouinard wrote the book, Let My People Go Surfing, and everyone wanted to work for Patagonia, he took the WAS out of Walmart. Walmart phoned him up 6 months later and said, we want to do better. And Chouinard and Stanley had the intelligence to realize if they can make Walmart better by 2%, they would have a bigger effect on the world than creating a brand new Patagonia. So the Sustainable Apparel Coalition was formed. This is a moderating body. They take lots of evidence and they try and combine it into a simple scale. So the first thing is we have the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. The next thing is that we have the metrics we use, and they're part of what's known as the Higg Index. The third part is we have the people who provide the platform for the Higg Index. They're just called Higg. So we have confusion that Higg means two different things. Add in another curveball, the CEO of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is now the CEO of Higg. So it's very easy to get confused. And the whole time I hear people talking about problems, and they're not even describing the problem. But when the Higg Index started to be used about a decade ago, it offered an answer to audit fatigue. Audit fatigue when they carry out what's going wrong, and the people who are doing the assessments of the audit could not tell the difference, for example, between the responsible down standard and the traceable down standard. They are 98% the same, but they are different, and you need to tell the difference. That was 10 years ago. I would now say the biggest problem is audit confusion. The consumer sees the label, and whether it's a blue sign label, an organic label, a fair wear, a fair trade label, they just see one label and they think that everything's the same, which actually belittles the process. This summer, we've had two challenges. The Norwegian Consumer Authority challenged Norrona for using a prototype tool. It belongs to the Material Sustainability Index. For the first time, they had a consumer-facing number. But also in New York, there was a challenge to H&M based on exactly the same grounds. All of this information that goes into the Higg Index that is moderated by the Sustainable Apparel Coalition essentially comes from LCAs, life cycle assessments. Life cycle assessments are a tool that was created for the building industry. We use them in textiles. It's not perfect, but there's no other better analysis system that I've seen. So if we go on to a little bit of detail, there are 5 Higg tools. These are them. The challenge came into number 4, the Material Sustainability Index, that designers were accessing to try and work out their fabric choices. And then the prototype bit was a consumer-facing number. And this is why we need to carry out these environmental impact assessments. I remember the drought of '76. I remember it being hot. Compared to this year, it was nothing. We have the social issues going on, the Uyghur population of coerced cotton growers. We have what man-made problems we're creating. This is the Aral Sea, where 90% is gone. We have the periodic table. The stuff in red means less than 1% of this is recycled. The rare earths are being created. And I thought this was a humorous slide. The more I look at it, the more I think it's actually reality. And if we don't do something very soon, we're the species who are going to disappear from the planet. We have people like Alec Leach bringing these 4 questions. He has identified the customers think we as brands always operate in best practice. He thinks that all us brands are paying attention and taking the right choice. We have someone like Alden Wicker, who is an American-based, very respected textile and fashion journalist, who has actually highlighted that, yeah, we do have good practice, but to tell you the truth, we're selling so much more stuff. The little improvements we have are not balanced out by our rate of volume increase. And then to top it all, we have greenwashing. And we could talk for ages on greenwashing. But what I've done is I have assembled a panel of 4 characters. I'd like to invite them on stage. I've got Dr. Mark Taylor from Leeds University. I've got Ben from Intersport International. I've got Christina from Nilorn. And I've got Kjersti from 2025 Design in Norway. Would you like to come on stage and join me? Now, as they're coming on stage, I just want to describe why we've got these people. You can sit anywhere you want. I'm going to be in this chair. So, for those people who don't realize, Dr. Mark Taylor might be the best authority we have in the industry on technical textiles. He wrote the Microfiber Consortium ISO, so he's very familiar. It's not yet been approved, it's been put forward, it is their standardized text. He did well. The point I'm trying to make, I know Katie's in the audience and she prodded him and helped him. But Katie, I didn't know you were here to invite you on stage. They have experience about trying to get an impact assessment system recognized by everyone. I have Christina from Nilorn, and you're a paying member who uses the Higg index and the Higg tools currently. I have Kjersti, who has a passion for wool, which gets an awful rating when you use the Higg index. She's a very thought-out designer, but she's Norwegian. She saw the Higg index challenge by the Norwegian Consumer Authority firsthand. And finally, I have Ben. Ben is from Intersport International, so that's the private label side of Intersport. So he's not going to talk about the whole of Intersport. Intersport International dropped out of being a member because they found it too expensive. So I've tried to assemble a group of us who have a different point of view. So I'm going to sit down and join them, and I'm going to start with you, Mark. I would like you just to say, I've tried to introduce you, but you can do it with far greater detail. Can we just have 2 minutes why we should listen to you, please, Mark?
I don't know. Mark Taylor, I work at the University of Leeds. I teach undergraduates sustainable fashion. It's a brand new program. If you've got any kids that want to do a really meaningful degree, send them to Leeds. It's the only one of its kind in the UK. I do research into lots of areas. Katie roped me into doing some microfiber research about 7 years ago, which has culminated in a standard that's oft being voted on by ISO at the moment. I did not write it on my own. There was a team of us. Lucy Tiffin's gone now, but she was part of it, and we got Alice. Katie was involved in her own way. My colleague, Dr. Sumner. The Microfiber Consortium that funded quite a bit of the work. So don't just say I did it on my own, Charles. I didn't. Yeah, what else? That's about it.
Christina, why have we invited you on, and what is your status within Nilorn?
You have invited me because we bumped into each other at the EOG, and I asked you what you think about the Higg MSI. Because, well, let's start a little bit from the beginning. I work at Nilorn. Nilorn is a supplier for branding and packaging products, so we make ingredients for textile and fashion industry. And my role at Nilorn is the material and innovation specialist. So what I do is, together with the team, look into new materials entering the market and evaluate them in terms of sustainability and feasibility for our products. Our company uses the Higg facility tools, since our brands and brand partners also use Higg by themselves. They usually use the brand tools and the retail tools, and so that's how we communicate with them in terms of sustainability, in terms of providing data from ourselves to them to add to their Higg platform.
So you're now, when you're providing materials, you're providing Higg information. You're not waiting for them to ask. You're now providing it straight away.
Yes, we provide it proactively. And now the third tool we started to look into, that was the Higg MSI. We started looking into this by the beginning of the year, because we thought it could help us to evaluate the materials we are using for our products, and also to evaluate products, materials we could use in future, because we also have a material strategy. And we are working on a framework to showcase, okay, which would be the preferred materials we want to use in future. And to do so, we have looked into different frameworks, different information, different types of research results we found in the industry, and also the Higg MSI was one of the tools. And what I found there when I looked really deep into it was that it's not as easy as it looks, because first you think, oh, it's a great tool where you can actually rate different types of materials and compare them. But at the end of the day, due to the different quality of the data, different methodologies used to get the data, and the different also different actuality, it's actually hard to compare. And we, for example, identified that we identified that natural materials always have a much lower score than synthetic materials. And then I was digging a little bit deeper, finding out, okay, this is because the renewable carbon content from natural fibers is not subtracted. So it's really not, I don't want to go too much into detail, but it's really hard to actually use it to compare, especially to compare materials, especially compare materials from different material families, like comparing polyester with tencel would not lead anything, because tencel is a natural fiber and it has a much worse score than polyester. And let me at least share one impressive example. I've been looking at leather, and alligator skin had the best score, about 4.9. And I mean, you all would agree that we don't want to use real alligator skin on our products. And I think that is a really good example about the challenges with the Higg MSI, that it's because the areas where it looks at is limited, and you need to be aware of that. Sorry for the long talking.
Can I remind you, Christina is speaking in favor of the Higg Index. Kjersti, can I pass it on to you, please? What are you bringing to this conversation other than insight from Norway?
Yeah, I thought you invited me because I'm in the middle of the shit storm. It's where the shit hits the fan. Oh, you invited me because I'm very close to the wool industry, the global wool industry, which I work for a lot and which I love a lot. And as maybe some of you have also recognized or seen, the wool industry, along with some other natural fiber industries, organizations, are also having campaigns on criticism against the Higg Index. 12 years ago, I wrote quite a good article on wool in LCA, which is the reason for me being invited into actually being part of the developing some of the Higg Index. I represented the International Wool Textiles Organizations for several years there. And my main, let's say, criticism of using LCAs, because I'm critical to the use of LCAs in comparing and of course also in communicating products, and in this case specifically textiles, is that the LCA would disadvantage a lot of materials. Let's say it doesn't show the whole picture. I mean, no, it's just a few impact categories. But you would never be able to show, like in the Higg Index, that the wool or any other natural fiber that you are looking at, and you explained it, I think, very well, that also have qualitative aspects to them. So you only get the quantitative, you get the data, the facts, the metrics, numbers, but you never get the other part of the story, which is that the wool does need less laundry, it doesn't smell, and et cetera, et cetera. So we have, and all fibers, all materials have something good, and they do have something less good. So I'm a big advocate for having both qualitative and quantitative data and facts combined into one tool to make it more meaningful.
And finally, we've got Ben. To find someone who was a user of the Higg Index, and essentially it was not value for money. It was creating work. And I said, Ben, we need you. We need you. Because to me, he was on top of data, which is how we're all going forward. But it did not make commercial sense. Ben, say a little bit more.
I'm a bit scared that I'm going to disappoint you now, Charles, because I mean, actually, I would say one of the benefits that I can maybe bring to this is that we're somehow on the fence. We're quite critical on both sides, and we never actually got started with Higg. We spent a lot of time thinking about Higg and thinking about the good things and the bad things, but especially the workload. I mean, I spent a lot of time today and yesterday talking to other suppliers or companies talking about Higg and how much effort it is to use it, and we all know it's a lot of work. You have to invest in time and people. So for us, it's really this question: does it give the benefit as well as, you know, it costs a lot? It takes a lot of time and a lot of investment to use, and is it actually giving the value and the transparent data that is making it all worthwhile? So I think that's one of maybe the benefits that I can bring here, is a bit of perspective from our point of view, and yeah, I think it has already some fantastic comments, but especially like you were saying, it doesn't cover all the topics. So one of the things for me, I'm quite an advocate, I'm going to drop it in there, cradle to cradle is one of my standpoints, and Higg doesn't really look at the very end. You know, it doesn't look at the impact of waste, it doesn't look at the negative impacts of plastic on the environment, where it ends up, and maybe not necessarily the global warming potential. It looks at that, but it doesn't look at the waste or the pollution potential. You know, right now, before this, we had the topic about fiber-to-fiber recycling, but how likely is this T-shirt actually now going to get recycled? It's low. It's under 1%. So I think that's another topic that it doesn't necessarily cover, and before we definitely take the leap for us to work with Higg, we want to see that it's actually going to fulfill all of these balances and all these promises. And maybe one other thing is that for us, Higg is a tool, but it's not actually the main agenda. Actually, Higg is just a way to get to the product environmental footprinting that we all need to do at some point when it comes through the European law. So more than anything, we're quite focused on what are the regulations that are coming through with the Green Deal, and how can Higg work towards that, and how can it be aligned to that. And I think if Higg can answer the questions that PEF sets out, then we're much more relaxed. But if Higg is not answering some of those questions, then we're not going to be able to get started on it, because then we'll have to start again with something else. But I think there's some clear benefits of Higg already. You know, everyone, or a vast majority of suppliers here, have to already or want to already work with Higg. It's clearly around in the ecosystem of the textile industry. So I think that's a fantastic starting point.
And building on what Ben's just introduced, right now we're seeing the incoming EU Green Deal. They are not using the Higg. They are using product environmental footprinting as the basis of what the impact will be. There is a difference between the two, but LCAs are what gathers them together. They're both using an LCA model, but they're using different parts of it.
They haven't decided yet, though, have they? They don't know what metrics they're going to use. So, I mean, until they do, you can't start to answer these questions, can you, Ben?
This is the question I want to ask. We're using LCAs. We have the product environmental footprints. Is there anything better on the market that we can use?
Nobody's going to use LCAs, are they? How many products do you make, Ben?
Many.
And how much does an LCA cost?
Thousands.
Tens of thousands, possibly, and takes months.
It takes 6 months or more.
Yeah. So it's not feasible, is it, to use LCAs as the basis for the PEF, which is why Higg did what it did and used commercially available LCAs that had been done by somebody else.
And I think Higg, to their credit, actually say that quite clearly, that they are a limited LCA. They're like a simplified LCA. They don't even claim to be a full LCA, and I think that's quite honest. That's quite transparent of them. And you can go a level up and have maybe a carbon footprinting done, which is slightly more, or you can go for the full LCA, which is, like you say, nobody will ever do this for all the product categories, and we don't have as many as someone like H&M. Or
imagine if you did, and then you changed a mill or a dye, and you had to redo it. You know, it might not even be finished by the time you make the next change. So they're not. It's not realistic to expect people to use LCAs to inform the PEF, or even the way they choose the materials they're going to use in their products, because it's just not going to work financially.
And
I'm just going to chuck in a little bit that Mark's left out. Mark talks about 10,000. It's tens of thousands.
No, I said tens.
It's 30 to 50,000 minimum for what information you want out. So that is what we can work out. Can we afford to preload a product if that's what we need to work?
And the quality of that LCA depends very much on what you ask them to do. Which impact categories are you interested in? Is it, you know, the ones that most people look at, water and carbon? Or are you interested in cumulative energy demand? Are you interested in land use? Water consumption, blue and green. You don't want to make this mistake Textile Exchange made of trying to compare your LCA to one that somebody else did 6 years ago in a different country, because that just makes you look fools when the world finds out. You've got to be really, really careful with using LCAs. But they're wonderful tools if you can afford them and stuff. And so the Higg tries to make that easier, doesn't it? It tries to make it such that brands can have a look. Now, I appreciate the issues. We had a look yesterday, me and Christina, at the mystery report when they looked at LCAs, and Lyocell doesn't look so bad because they haven't included the embedded carbon, which Higg does for some reason. But if you choose as your metrics embedded carbon and water, then you are always going to have the problem that wool's going to look rubbish, silk is just unusable, and cotton's pretty bad too. So, you know, you have to understand what these numbers mean and put it into context of the fibre and why you're choosing it. You might look at it and say, oh, it's persuading me to use polyester, but is polyester going to be the right fibre for the product you want to make? Because it might not be. If it's cotton you were using, there's a reason you were using cotton, and you ain't going to replace it with polyester probably. Like my Iron Maiden t-shirt, it's made of cotton. Nobody would make this out of polyester, would they?
So, we're talking in favour now, aren't we?
No, I think, I'm sorry, nobody else can talk. It's about understanding. People have got to know what it's telling you, and you've got to be able to put it into context. So it's not a tool for people who don't understand sustainability and fabrics. This is the problem, and I think maybe some brands think it is. Or I can just put in this stuff and it'll give me some numbers, and I can show that to my customers. And that loses that context, the reason we're using cotton. And also, the Higgs, it's more general, isn't it? So, well, the thing the Textile Exchange did, you can do your LCA in cotton, on organic cotton in northern India where it rains a lot and you get one result, and then they could have done their own LCA of non-organic cotton in a drought-ridden part of China, you know, and you will get different results. Or it might have been a rainy part of China, or it might have been in the Caribbean, and you will get different results everywhere. But a tool like the Higg, that data doesn't exist, and nobody's paying that tens of thousands of euros to produce that data. So you have to accept the limitations that are there. You've got to understand what it means.
So, can I ask all four, is the weak point not the Higg, but how we use the data from the Higg? Because when I had it described to me, it was quite straightforward. It provides an extra channel of information. If you believe it gives you the answer, you're using it the wrong way. As in, it's something to start a debate. Ben, if I throw it to you, because you've used it, you've seen bits of it, what was the advantage of what the Higg MSI brought to the debate?
I think openly, I'm not going to be nearly as expertise as some others on the panel, but I mean...
commercially, you're straight there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, if you look at what Higg actually claimed to be, they claim to be an insights platform. So they're not claiming actually to be like the be-all, end-all, to be the silver bullet that's going to solve all problems. And I think actually that's maybe some of our interpretations that are a bit flawed there, because we see the need for an easy rating, we see the audit fatigue problems, we see the certification fatigue, and we also see the PEF, which also desperately wants an eco rating, a single ABC for the sustainability rating of any product, and that's possibly unachievable. You know, that we at some point have to confront whether that's even going to be possible, and I just think Higg is misinterpreted.
Kjersti, please, your views.
My view is that I love the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. I love the concept of it, and I like the Higg suite of tools. And you showed them up on the slides before. It's so much more than just the Higg MSI, and it's the MSI that's getting all the punishments and all the fightings. And of course, that's just a overview of all kind of materials and fibers, and it also includes zippers and buttons and things. So if you're a fabric maker, that's kind of all what you need. But if you're making garments, you need much more. And that is what the product tool is doing. So it's been criticizing the MSI for just being a cradle to gate, which it is, but then you have to add on the product module. And if you go into the product module and you're a garment manufacturer, you take all the your cutoffs, all the manufacturing processes, the prints, like the Iron Maiden shirt. You add all the processes you need. You add your logistics, you add your plastic packaging, the recycling rate, how you are selling it, if it's whether it is online or retail stores, and some assumptions about recycling and end-of-life solutions. So then I can put, and of course, one of the most important parts is the usage phase and the laundry. And I can add certifications for technical durability. And then I get a complete picture of my product, not just the materials. I think we should really stop fighting about the MSI. It is what it is, and it contains some data. They might not be the best, but maybe the best we have, it's not the best we can do. But it's there. But we need to include and look at the complete product tools, or both together. Because then my wool t-shirt, that absolutely is a loser when it comes to wool fabric or a wool yarn. If I make that a good one, and I know I can wash it very, very seldom, versus the t-shirt in polyester that you use for a gym that stinks after one wear, my wool t-shirt doesn't stink. So when you put in a model in this tool, the differences are in consumer behavior, the differences in how the quality you have made, all the lifetime expectations, etc. Wool is not such a loser after all. It comes out much more similar to a polyester, and now I'm talking only about the top material and the bottom material. So we should really stop throwing all this shit at the Higg and start using our time to do something much more productive. Learn the tools, learn how to understand LCAs, learn the limitations of all this data, but learn also how to navigate. And it's all just indicators. It's a snapshot. And an LCA is a historical snapshot. And I think the latest or newest wool data available in the MSI are from 2015. I mean, a lot has happened with the sheep since then.
Now, thank you for that. We're going to come back to 2 points you brought up, but Christina, what's your attitude on what's been said already?
I would like to add that I agree that it's an additional channel of information. It's something where we need to be aware not to build our solutions solely on that, but add it to other type of information, add it to other insights and individual research based on what we know. For us, it was an invitation to really dig deeper into LCA material. We actually have started a project now to look at our core products. We started now with care labels to look at the environmental impact of typical care label production. Specifically with the MSI, what I find really interesting was to see the impact of using recycled fibers actually for materials, because that is something you can see throughout all material families, that the impact in the different impact areas goes down, and that was again very useful for this framework I've been talking about, the framework to which we internally build now, the preferred material framework, because it assured us that it's really a good option, and that it's that it's a good way to move on to the use of more recycled materials, because then you can see it really on the numbers. So.
Go on, Mark. Fill in the gap, please.
What gap? No, it's really interesting. Kjersti said some things about use phase, and she's absolutely right. But no tool could ever fill those blanks in, because I have a wool base layer, I wear it a lot, I wash it very infrequently. I have a wool jumper that gets washed once a year. But my mum, if I was still living at home, like when I was a young lad, she'd wash that wool base layer every time I wore it, no matter what I tried to do, because you've got to change people's behaviour. You've got to somehow educate your customers. You've got to give them the information that a wool shirt only needs to be washed when it smells. It's a bit like jeans, isn't it? The CEO of Levi's never washes his jeans. And the idea is, unless you get them dirty, you don't need to wash them. And if they start to smell, I think he puts his in the freezer. But if you live in a sunny country, the sun will kill the bacteria. Hang them on a line outside, inside out, kill the bacteria, get rid of the smell, and wear them again. But you've got to persuade people to do that. Otherwise, the benefits don't get seen. And this is one of the problems with tools. You know, she's not there anymore. I won't name her. There's a friend of mine who sat down there earlier and we were chatting about stuff, and she said she's shocked at how many people she sees working in the industry at companies that don't employ material specialists, and that's her role. So how are they learning this stuff? Because that's just like the designer or whatever that's making the decisions, and they just walk around and believe what it says on the sign. You know, sit down with a bloke and he says, "Oh, it's really environmentally friendly." Honestly, we're turning carbon dioxide or methane into monoethylene glycol, and that makes it a better polyester. It's like, well, where are you getting your terephthalic acid from? But they're not asking that question because they don't know to, and then they're making decisions, and they're the people that would sit down and use something like the Higg tools and believe everything it told them because they don't know any different. So these are the problems with tools. But it's because it's not all we've got, but it's there. I think it's hard to fault the intention, as has been said. The data is, you know, you might try and challenge it, but it's based on properly done LCAs by real organisations. What's not so clear is the transparency over where they've set the boundaries and things like that, which is unfortunate, but maybe if you ask questions, they might tell you the answers. But yeah, I don't know what else to say, really.
So we know there's some drawbacks, and I want to ask the question, what can we add to assessing? Do we have longevity of use? Are there other factors? But how Higg was first described, or the Higg index was first described to me, even I'm using the wrong words now, is that you did the assessment and then you came back 6 months later. And the idea was to make sure that you were always showing progress in the right area. It wasn't to give you a solution, it was to accompany you on the journey, so you would suddenly identify that actually your material science was dead good, but your transport application or your additive application was the area where you can make the biggest change to bring things forward. So what is missing from an LCA or the Higg index scaling that would actually improve it, in your opinion? Mark, I'm going to start with you again.
It's back to those boundaries and things. If you don't include the use phase and end of life in any LCA, then that doesn't get captured. But it becomes a challenge. Ben talked about this, you know, his T-shirt won't get recycled. But even if it did, when you do the LCA, you've got to make an assumption about how it will be recycled, because different recycling techniques have different impacts of their own. So do you do all of them, which increases the cost and timescale of your LCA, or do you choose the one you think it will be, or do you just assume it will be incinerated if you live in Norway, or it will be landfilled if you live in the UK? You know, these are the issues. These I don't even know how you answer these questions, because I don't think you can. It's such an open-ended thing. Back to how many times will it be washed? You can make an assumption. We're going to tell them to wash it once a year because it's made of wool, but they still might wash it once a week. So you're out by a factor of 52. So you can't capture that stuff, can you? It's not really possible.
Christina, if you had the magic wand, what other information would you like the Higg index to pay attention to? So what additional information would you like to take out of it?
First, I have to say I'm a newbie to LCA, and I'm not sure if that is possible, what I would wish. But there's different criteria or different qualities that I would like to, that I think that are important when thinking about next generation materials, and that is the end of life. So is a material recyclable at the end of life? Yes or no, I think is important. Then another important quality is the social aspects, for sure. How was the material made? Does it have any negative or positive social impact? Another criteria is what about material health? What about the impact while using the product made of that material? Is there any emissions? Is there microfiber pollution? Durability is something that is for sure important. I actually couldn't say how that to include, but for me it would be definitely, or it is definitely criteria that are important for new material research and evaluation.
Kjersti, your turn.
Thank you. I would definitely include things that are now common sense in terms of the circular economy, the regenerative aspects, soil health, microfibers, not just microplastics, all the more qualitative aspects. And these were, if I can share a little bit of the history, when the SAC started out developing this Higg index like 10 years ago, these weren't aspects that were on the agenda then. They are quite new. But the SAC have been presenting topics like microfibers for the past 5-6 years. And since an organization or a coalition like that is based on democracy, and democracy might not be the most efficient way of doing things always, because it's always about, okay, who says yes, who says no, who can live with, who cannot live with. So a lot of great ideas kind of boils down to more mediocre results because of that, because we want everyone to be on board, everyone has a voice. And if we cannot live it, then we're not going to go forward with that. And I think it's like 8-9 years ago, it was a group of us, because it was all voluntary committees or working groups. We were, of course, volunteering for the product module, and at that time it was called the rapid design module. And we had some big hairy goals. First of all, we were inspired by the European Outdoor Group, the Eco Index, which really was a cool tool. It had some of those aspects of being visual, being qualitative and quantitative at the same time. It kind of disappeared, unfortunately, in this soup. And then we had some drafts that were very good, with emotional durability being one of the aspects. And then people in the room said, what is emotional durability? We only consider technical durability. And there were huge discussions, but emotional durability was a little bit like all the other use or consumer behavior things. You cannot measure them, and you cannot predict. I'm out to try to design things that people relate to, that people will love and can pass on to the next generation. But there is no formula for it. So all these aspects were kind of turned down at that time. And this might have been 2014 or something. But now everyone, or at least a majority in the industry, is of course talking about emotional durability. So some ideas are too early, and they get turned out because they are too scary, and many brands and many organizations are kind of fear-based management. So the sustainability people sitting there representing maybe a huge global brand might not even have had the courage to say, oh, I think that sounds fascinating. I would love to say yes. But I don't dare to, because I don't know how the reaction will be at home. So there are so many factors in building up something like the SAC and the Higg and finding consensus in what we are going to bring to the table in the end.
Wow. Ben, if you could change what it could offer, what would you change?
it's tough to add to any of those, and I think I would maybe expand on them instead. But I think if I look at the module base of Higg on the MSI itself, I'm a big believer, as I said, about the end of life, so the risk potential. And I think, you know, you were saying, well, it's so tough to know what is, you know, how do you rank whether this product can be recycled or what's going to happen to this zipper puller. But I think probably there could be a way just to at least put something in there to say, you know, this product is being sold in Europe, textile recycling is non-existent, so it's a 0. In America, for instance, it's not existing there either, but if it was, then it might get a 1. So I think you could, in theory, start to rank based on regions perhaps of where the material is going to end up or where the product is going to be sold. And that would be somehow on the MSI side. I would see that, you know, is that material possible to be recycled or not, or what is the risk potential of the end of life? But I think as well the beginning of life, like it was touched on with the social side, I think that's massive. I mean, we all talk about sustainability. Nobody defines sustainability as well. That's a classic thing. We even don't use the word sustainability day to day because it's quite a contentious topic. What is it? You know, everyone here will have a different opinion probably of what it means, but a key thing that's often missed is the social side. And I think that is a huge thing that should be in the Higg somehow. And again, it could be built into the MSI potentially, or definitely into the product module. But you know, if you look at the product module, it's about how the conditions of the product being built, being stitched together. But on the material side, I would definitely include the animal welfare part as well, because like you say, the crocodile for sure is higher or better rated because the cattle industry, the leather industry, hugely polluting. We all know that. Like, it's a terrible industry. And crocodiles, I guess, have no footprint because they're just in the water. There's nothing behind that. So it's kind of very clear why an LCA, traditional LCA, would favor crocodile. But again, it's one of those misnomers that it's like just a very wrong data in, giving a wrong data out. But if you were to also rank animal welfare, animal cruelty, then down, and crocodile and other things would suddenly scale or be ranked very differently. So I think the social side, but also the animal welfare side, I would love to see built into Higg somehow to account for some of these risks. And I think it would be quite surprising. You know, a lot of us might stop using something like down or something like leather if we actually saw in the data that's a terrible industry and maybe cotton is better, or some of these other fantastic opportunities. That I think would be quite interesting. And I don't want to say it too much, but the end of life, you know, if you could really see how the product's going to be recycled. And I do think you could set certain parameters on the use stage as well, because you have so much happening on circularity now. You know, you can, multiple companies set their own sustainability rating, or there's third parties that also set circularity ratings, which might be based on repairability or durability, and they already set these ratings and they already score themselves internally. So I do think there would probably be a pragmatic way to set that in the product module as well. You know, as simple as a tick box that says, did you design this product to be repairable? Yes, gets one extra point, and the scale goes up a little bit. You know, it doesn't have to be so extreme measurements, but it could at least be a rating that influences the final judgment of the product.
I think a lot of what you've just talked about, though, Ben, doesn't fit in the MSI. It fits in the product tool. That we talk about recyclability. Your T-shirt is simple, but if you're talking about, say, a waterproof jacket, so many components there that you can't apply that at materials level. It can only come at product level.
I totally agree. I mean, I was trying to split it a bit anyway, that some things you should improve to the MSI and some things you should improve to the product module, and some things also to the factory module, and they all have their benefits, and I think they've set that out quite nicely in Higg, that it is split, but each one can be adjusted or tweaked accordingly.
I like your idea of the checkbox, because you could also include their design for disassembly, all sorts of other things, you know, besides repairability, so yeah.
Now we're coming to the end of the session. What I'm happy to do is to take any questions from the audience. I think you'll gather I've assembled quite a team of people with a range of opinions. Does anyone want to ask any questions about the Higg Index or the application? Because otherwise, I want to field a question to them myself.
Katie wants to ask a question.
Katie does. Here we go, Katie.
Katie knows more about this than we do.
Yeah, it's not so much a question, it's more a comment, really. I think during this conversation, we've used the terms Higg and LCAs quite interchangeably. And I think we have to be quite clear that, Higg is not producing the data is coming from a different database. And then my other comment is around, this idea of including animal welfare and social within the tools. And I think there could be opportunity for this, but we have to be realistic and think about what should exist in a company policy. So you should not need a tool to tell you that crocodile skin is a no-no. You should have robust policies within your organisation when it comes to social and when it comes to animal welfare. And I think, social and animal welfare, it's clear-cut, there's right and wrong. It's not a gradient. But when it's environmental topics and it's data, there is a sliding scale, and then there are, boundaries within certain companies on where the boundaries lie. So I think, it's not a question, it's just adding to the conversation, really.
For those of you who don't know Katie, by the way, Katie leads the sustainability representation of the European Outdoor Group. She's more informed than people realise. She has a lot of influences going in. I listen to Katie. She educates me.
Just building what Katie's quite right. We should be careful how we use these words. So Higg uses more than one commercial LCA database. It's based on one main one.
The Higg Index.
Sorry, the Higg Index does. No, it's the MSI. It's so, and that they've done their LCAs, and like I said, there's a lack of transparency there. But brands can upload their own LCA data, can't they, to the MSI? So, but then you've got to trust that people are doing it properly and stuff. So we got other issues. But then one thing that occurred to me when we're talking about crocodiles, and it's something that occurs to me like happened in the past with avocados and things for eating. Crocodiles might have a very low impact, and it may well be that these are crocodiles that die of old age and people take their skin off, and that's why it's so low. But if people started using it and all of a sudden there's a massive demand for crocodile skin, that's when we'll see all the cruelty come in. What happened with avocado? Avocados grown in Mexico are brilliant. Avocados grown anywhere else are probably really bad for the environment because they've cut rainforests down to grow them so that people in the West can eat them because we suddenly got excited about avocados. And this worries me a little bit. So I think if they're not updating their data regularly to bring in the new factors that might occur because things become more or less popular, people will make decisions based on old data, and that could be terrible.
So what I want to do, to me, if you are starting to understand what the Higg Index is now, I would summarise and say it's a lot deeper, it's a lot more complicated than people thought. And I have a question coming in. How can we make the Higg Index more affordable is one question. Yeah, how can we make the Higg Index more affordable? Do we feel that we can answer the question? I think that's a question we might have to throw to Higg company themselves. But we're not able to do it. So
I would say that if it's going to be something that's informing, especially European regulation, then I couldn't say how to make it cheaper, but I think it does need to be affordable to all levels. I mean, at the moment, it's used by the highest, kind of largest brands, and as you go down that to the smaller brands, then it's of course getting not only the membership costs, but also just the running costs, the complication. You do have to add more staff or to add more hours, working hours into it. So I think if it's going to become a legal obligation through some regulation that Higg is abiding by, then it does need some checking on the price for sure.
I had the same comments as Ben, so.
Okay, what I want to do is to close this panel, but I'm going to attempt to summarise my observation. And I want to ask it in the form of a question. So there's a closed question. Despite everything we've heard, do you still think that it's worth pushing ahead with the Higg Index? And secondly, we've heard of ups and downs and everything else, but I think something I hadn't considered enough was the amount of resource the company has to put in time-wise, and people think that this data will give us a precise answer, but as Christina pointed out, it's an extra channel of information. So it's two questions, a simple yes and no, should we push ahead with it? And then a more complex question, if you do push ahead with it, how do you cope with the amount of time you need? Or if you do not push ahead with it, what are you going to do as a substitute? Mark, do you want to start?
We obviously, I work in a university, we don't use this tool. Should you proceed with it, you need something, and it's a good starting point, otherwise you're starting from zero, so probably. How do you handle the costs? Well, back to the comment of the friend of mine, you know, you really need to employ people to do these roles, and you've got to find the money for it. And so even if you could access all the Higg tools for free, you'd still have the cost of the staffing, and there's not a lot you can do about that. And as the old saying goes, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, so you're going to have to pay them a decent salary.
Yes, I think we should move on with it. I think the upside of it is that there's a lot of companies already using Higg and the Higg tools, so it can be something like a common language within the industry. And I think if the industry commits to it, and if it will be updated, if it will be improved, then we do this commitment. And if we commit to it, then we need to somehow find the time to work with it. It's just that simple.
I think definitely we
It's on. It's on.
It's on.
Yeah.
Now it's on. Yeah. Sorry. I think definitely we should move on with the both the SAC and the Higg index. It has been a decade of work put into something to build a coalition, and 50% of the industry is joining. What would be the alternative? If we tear it down, if you destroy it, as some of the critics actually wanting to do, what would be our alternative? To start all over again? And would the industry trust someone to start a new initiative? And would it be any better or very much different? I do think, though, that SAC might need to speed up a bit, be more, maybe more open, and change some of their behavior as well. But in general, yes, we need something to gather around. It's like a campfire. We need to gather around something, and to discuss it and to criticize it is wonderful, because that is what brings us forward. Exchanging arguments and being not agreeing on everything like today or like the critics. It's so important to have that, because that moves us forward together.
I think it's a very somehow loaded question, Charles, to say, is it good or is it bad? It's somehow neither. It's a tool. And I think, like we said, there is no better tool at the moment. If you go around the fair, nobody else is using some other rating system. We're all around the campfire at the moment with Higg. So I couldn't agree more. Like, there's no choice but to continue with it. We shouldn't throw it out. And like you've been quoting the last few days, the world's on fire. We're still making shoes. We should still be using some tool to be monitoring what we're doing. If we didn't start monitoring, it will be another 10 years even until we have something so-called better. But we have no proof that it would be better. And I think as well that it's based on LCAs. Everything else is also based on LCAs. If we go and do a carbon footprint of these shoes right now, it will be the same LCAs anyway. So the underlying data is the same. If you take away Higg and put something else there, it will be the same again. So if you're willing to start challenging the LCA methodology and the framework, then great. And I think Higg can then grow into that as well, and they can incorporate any changes of what we've discussed. I can't personally see an opportunity to move into a different direction than Higg at the moment. It's the clear unifying factor. And the other topic was about how to put it in the company, right? Yeah, I think we definitely are quite wary of the time it takes to not only the MSI, but also the product module, how to build a complex product in the product module. If you do a t-shirt, it's pretty okay, but if you did a down jacket or outside from the pure textile industry, something like a complicated backpack with metal and plastic, or we also make stand-up paddle boards. That's got textile all through the middle of it, but it's also got carbon fiber and plastics and engineering materials. So when you go onto those levels of complexity, that's a real challenge. And I think I'm quite an optimist that in the future, the more that I see every company going into Higg and having a Higg rating on their fabric or onto their buckles and trims, that will alleviate that, because then you can pull it in from the raw material suppliers, and then maybe the manufacturers or the product builders don't have to worry so much about the MSI part and maybe more about the product part. And the other thing that we didn't really touch on is another acronym, the APIs. So to actually integrate Higg into the existing tools that you have. So, you know, if you work with a PLM system to design your products, right now Higg is kind of on top. It doesn't fully integrate, but I know their goal is to fully integrate that, and then it will become much easier. If you've got a PLM system where you've already got your bill of materials, you've got all your trims, you've got everything in there already, and it can just pull in the Higg part or interchange or exchange the data, that will help a lot and take away some of this manual work.
The good news is I know Higg are going to watch this. So the team at Higg Company will take all these points on board. They admit the world is not perfect. They know they have to improve. And I'm very grateful to Performance Days have given us a stage to actually talk directly to people, to not only talk about what the controversy was, to talk about how it should be improved, but actually to get some practical advice for where it can go in again. I am grateful that Higg Company are listening. I'm grateful that the industry's moving, and I know through collaboration, through working together, things will improve. But if I try and summarize, there's not a simple answer. Sustainability, we all know, is a journey, and if we knew where we were going precisely, we would all focus and we wouldn't have to spend so much time. I think what this panel has elaborated is the amount of controversial, the amount of conflicting detail, the amount of attention or emphasis. And I am really, really grateful. I tried to get 4 people who would not agree. I tried to get 4 people who came from completely different aspects, and I think I've succeeded. I've just tried to cajole them. But can I ask you to show your appreciation for Mark, Christina, Kjersti, and Ben, please? Now, I'm not going to let the 4 of them escape. I'm going to make them stand by the stage, because if you want to ask them questions individually, do ask them. But thank you for listening. I hope you understand a little bit more, even if you just recognize it's a Pandora's box. Thank you.